Uh-oh.
Okay.
Now we're good? Okay. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Melanie Jacobs, a librarian at the Pratt Light Street branch. As you know, Pratt locations are open to the public at 50% capacity, safety protocols in place, and with expanded hours of operation. Pick up a compass at your local library or go to prattlibrary.org to discover more about Pratt's wonderful programs and services. Let's begin this evening's event. During the Great Depression, hobbies such as stamp collecting, music making, and woodworking were popular activities. In fact, studies have shown that picking up new hobbies during uncertain times is vital to one's mental health. So, welcome to What Did You Do During the Pandemic? A new interactive lecture series exploring the ways people entertained themselves, learned, and grew during the isolation of the past year. Some of us binge watched Netflix, baked too many loaves of bread, tackled a home improvement project, or enjoyed TikTok dance challenges to occupy ourselves and improve our sense of well being. Joining us this evening is Cornelia Beckett, who has graciously agreed to discuss her quarantine hobby and to share her newfound knowledge of perfume's history, culture, and glamour. Welcome, Cornelia.
Melanie, thank you so much for having me this evening, and thank you to the Pratt Library. Thank you to all of you who are watching. This is going to be a two-part lecture. So I'm going to begin with an explanation of my hobby, of what I'm doing, and then those of you who picked up the Take and Make portion of the program are going to get to enjoy the sniff along challenge and piece. So without further ado, I'm just going to be clicking through. And the platform I'm on right now, if you write a comment on this Facebook live stream, I will be able to see it and hopefully respond. So please keep them coming. Thank you so much to Melanie. Thank you to the Pratt. This is the first in the series, and I'm delighted to be here. My goal for this evening is to share my pandemic passion with you and inspire you to learn more about, wear, or enjoy fragrance, and perhaps even pursue a extravagant passion of your own. So, scent is, of course, extremely evocative. It's one of our most powerful senses, and it's the most powerful sense connected to memory. Research shows that it can bring back memories for folks suffering from memory loss. It activates our limbic system, our flight or flight nerves. So, if you'd like to post a comment of what scent evokes for you, and don't feel limited to perfume. I've posted some popular ones here in the slide deck: warm hot chocolate, newly sharpened pencil, scratch and sniff stickers, or maybe a new car scent even. So go ahead and post that, and I'll hopefully be able to see what you've written. Leaves changing in the fall, that's a wonderful one. That sort of petrichor, we have that right now. Seasonal memories are very powerful. I'll just give it a couple seconds to see if anyone else would like to share what they is evocative for them. I know that for me, when I smell coffee brewing and oatmeal in the morning, I'm 8 years old again, and I'm at my grandmother's house. It's amazing how scent can be a portal to different times. So, in that sense of past, present, and future, I'd like to give us three different quotes that I think really encapsulate what perfume and what scent can do for us. So Francis Kurkdjian, the designer behind 2021's most popular scent, Baccarat Rouge 540, famously said, "Perfume is the art that makes memory speak." So, of course, we cast back into the past. It makes our memories speak, and it's an art. I love that this quote talks about perfume as an art because we don't necessarily think of cosmetics as art. It's not visual, it's not auditory, and yet the amount of care, art direction, design, resources, chemistry, and myth making that go into it absolutely qualify perfumery as an art. The second quote is by chemist and very cheeky perfume reviewer Luca Turin. Highly, highly recommend his criticism. He wonderfully said, "Perfume is the most portable form of intelligence." And I love that. As I said, it's an art form, but also in every drop of perfume, you have the art direction, the perfumer, you have the worker who harvested the roses, or the lab worker who synthesized the molecules to make it. You have the memories attached to it. You have the story that the art director and ad team may have created. You may have the interpersonal relationship that a sales associate might have built with you, and you bring it with you everywhere. It's something, we haven't invented smell-o-vision yet, so perfume has to quite literally be portable and proximate to us. And finally, famous designer of course, the most ubiquitous perfume of all time, Chanel number 5, Gabrielle Coco Chanel said, "A woman who doesn't wear perfume has no future." So we want to acknowledge the past and the present, but also think about the future. And of course, this is, one of her waggish aphorisms about style, much like you remove one accessory before leaving the house. But it's something to think about. Perfume is a promise of the kind of person you want to be or the story you want to tell. And so much of perfumery that I do is casting into the past, but it's also a nod toward the future. So with those to chew on as we continue. So, of course, the title of the series is What I Did During the Pandemic. And in lockdown, in those scary moments in March, April, May 2020, when we didn't quite know what was going on, we couldn't necessarily leave our homes or see people or do anything familiar, we turned inward for escapism. For some people, that might have looked like baking sourdough. For others, that may have looked like getting lost in a video game. I decided to escape through our most neglected sense, the sense of smell. And I put 3 perfume ads here from the 50s, 70s, 90s. And those 3 decades are going to echo in the perfumes that we sniff together later. You'll notice that the motif of escapism is a big part of the story around perfume, whether it's the passport to another land, by Goya, the woman holding a shell to her ear, for Fougeres by Nina Ricci, listening for some far-off connection, or of course the quite literal name of Calvin Klein's 1992 perfume, Escape. So I wanted to escape. I had a little more disposable income because I wasn't going out all the time. I was stir crazy and restless and needed a hobby. So I decided to finally indulge in something that I had always loved, which is buying little samples of perfume. And what did I do with that? I sniffed and I wrote every single day for months. So my little packet, you see the photo on the left, I ordered from Lucky Scent. And by the way, I'm not sponsored by any of these companies. I haven't been comped anything. This is sheerly for the love. It's a total passion project and everything is out of my own pocket. So I ordered a grab bag of just perfumes that sounded interesting to me. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to do a deep dive into these art forms and just figure it out. And those of you who are watching this and want to get into perfume, that is part of my advice to you. There's no 101 place to start except maybe smelling some of the classics like number 5 or Aromatics Elixir, which we're going to smell together later. But I just simply sniffed and wrote every single day for months. I posted my reviews on Instagram stories where everybody seemed to be hanging out. And I posted some screenshots in the slide deck. As I learned every single day, I wrote stories about what I was smelling. I refined those olfactory bulbs, the nasal passages, and I got stronger at picking out different notes. For example, you see in the middle, Maison Violette, Une Aire d'Apogée. I compared it to Glossier U, a more popular perfume. I was able to pick out the ambroxan note, which is not readily available. You can only smell a bunch bunch of perfumes that have it listed as an ingredient before you'll know how to pick that out. I said, I wish I could sense the anise and sage as top notes, what you smell right away, but no. And on the right, another example, Diessenberger's Debaser. So, I also unpacked the bottles. Of course, you see on the left, I just got little samples, but there's a story not just in the juice, as we call the liquid in a perfume bottle, but in the title of a perfume. Debaser is a reference to the band The Pixies, which tells us a story about the sort of 80s alternative branding that might be going on. The bottle shape, it's minimalist but fun. It has that very 2010s black text on white background. So something that I forget, but that I hope you remember, is that when you're learning or doing anything new, time is an ingredient. Much like you can't cram for an exam, and you really do have to study over time. My study of perfume was not built overnight, and nor should it be for you. Time is an ingredient when we learn anything new. And through practicing every day, through thinking every day, through writing every day, through ordering new things, and through some other educational methods, I was able to build a little bit of clarity and precision, and also make a fool of myself along the way as well. So the practice that really clarified my learning was sharing with others. You can sniff in a void, in a vortex, and have it be kind of a private pleasure. You could write in a journal. Many smart people have done that. You could start a blog. You could do a YouTube channel. I did my little Instagram stories, and I loved posting the bottle because the bottle is such a forgotten piece of art as well. So I posted some here for you to see. And I was really profligate with the time periods that I took perfume from. Poison is the 80s, Rive Gauche is the 70s, Rêve d'Océan is newer, but you can tell by the design that they're kind of casting back to more than 100 years ago. There was no one note that I sought out. I just clicked on whatever looked good or interesting. And through Instagram, I met other people. And I had a lot of people write to me and say they really loved their reviews and that they inspired other people to go on their own sort of scent journey. Going back to the timepiece, something really special about perfume is that it can have an aspect of time travel. Barbara Herrmann writes about this in her book about a history of scent. You can learn about the values of a time. So on the right, you have Yves Saint Laurent's Rive Gauche, which is a very dry, sort of tomboyish rose that fit the androgynous mores of the 70s, whereas Poison in the middle by Dior is this quintessentially 80s, glamorous, big hair, big shoulder pads, spend, dramatic scent. Whereas in the 90s, fitting with grunge, and we'll sniff a little bit of this with our vial of L'Eau d'Issey, there was a trend more toward minimalism, and the pendulum swung in the opposite direction. So if you're lucky enough to have come of age in the 20th century, smelling a good perfume might be a portal for you. I know this is true for me when I finally smelled the famous Calvin Klein CK1. I'll show you some ads from that. I realized, oh my goodness, a teacher of mine must have worn this because I got one whiff of it and it was as if I had time traveled back to a classroom again. I could, practically taste the peanut butter sandwiches and feel what it was like to sit at a desk. So I encourage you, and this is something where the richness of age at time as an ingredient, like I said, comes in. The older you are, the more you might have smelled of perfumes that are no longer made. But then the greater possibility there is for you of smelling something that will take you back immediately in time. And then sharing it daily. Any hobby, you have to practice daily if you want to get good at it. And that's what I did. So just going over a little more what I learned in my daily deep dive of fragrance over the past year. This is kind of all over the place, much like fragrance is diffuse. I'm afraid that my learning isn't linear, but these are just some little tidbits from me. So scent and memory are even more powerful than you realized. I know you know that's true already, but it bears repeating. Here you see a nice little a diagram of how aromatic substances, the tiny molecules, travel through our nasal cavity, stimulate the olfactory neurons and the bulb, and then it lights up, as I said earlier, our limbic system, which controls that most basal animal level of fight or flight. So you might think you like something and then it turns out you don't. For example, I thought I hated roses and then I smelled all these rose-based perfumes and I realized, okay, I don't necessarily love a fresh cut rose, but the chemical reinterpretation of that is fabulous. I learned that cost doesn't equal quality. For a good bottle of perfume, you'll expect to pay about $75 to $200. That's why I love samples. Those are going to be about $4 or $5 each. But the difference between a $200 bottle and a $400 bottle is really just a question of marketing. And for example, you'll see in the bottom right corner here, Lovely by Sarah Jessica Parker, which people might roll their eyes at. It's a $15 perfume that you can get at the bargain bin at Marshall's and TJ Maxx. And it's one I love. I reach for it weekly. And it was actually written about in a book that I'm going to touch on, The Perfect Scent by Chandler Burr. Something else I learned that I didn't know, but I hope you learn, is that a fashion house, let's say Gucci, all the perfumes in Gucci are not made by Gucci. They're contracted out to perfumers. So if there's a scent that you really like, instead of looking out, let's say you really like something by Gucci, instead of looking at the other Gucci perfumes, you can go and look and see who designed that and try out their other pieces of art. And when you do that, you'll notice a through line. So here I included a picture of Bernard Chant, the legendary French perfumer who made aromatics elixir that we're going to smell. Chant designed not only aromatics elixir, which is for Clinique, a cosmetics brand, but he also did Ralph Lauren for the line of the same name, which is a typically preppy American clothing company. And he did Cabochard by Grès, which is, a classic French couture house for all these different brands. His signature oak mossy, sort of masculine, leatherish, green note shines through. And that was a real pleasure discovering how different artist, designer, perfumers' footprints touch on all their creations. So if you find a perfume that you like, that would be my advice. Certainly try the rest of the line, but check out some stuff by the same perfumer. I supplemented my search, so sniffing is not enough. You have to learn. And of course, I see in the comments, adore Lovely. Yes, Lovely is fantastic. If you are on a budget, but you want to buy a bottle of something fun that anyone, and I mean anyone in your life will enjoy, go to CVS, go to Marshall's, find the gift box set of Lovely. Do not pay full price for it. It's a lot of fun. So of course, we are the library. I wanted to include some books that you can check out here from Pratt. So something really surprising to me in doing a fragrance deep dive is that there are very few books about perfume. You would think that there would be more, but blogging really allowed perfume to flourish and thrive, even though it was, thousands of years old as an art form. Designer perfume, as we understand it now, is about 100 years old, but very, very few books exist. So a book about the making of the perfume I mentioned, Lovely, The Perfect Scent by New York Times perfume critic Chandler Burr. That's great. That's about the nuts and bolts of both art direction and the chemical process. Perfumes, The Guide by Luca Turin, who I mentioned at the beginning, is fabulous. It's just kind of an index with funny, snarky reviews, what's good, what's not. You may not agree with everything, but it's a great reference. And I worked my way through and I checked little perfumes off of their list as I went through, and I made notes in the margins. My own copy, not the library's, but I encourage you to check it out if you want to expand your idea of what writing about scent can be. It's right up there with the best music criticism or art criticism, in that it makes Luca Turin and his wife Tania Sanchez make wide-ranging associations. They talk about memory, they talk about art, they talk about music and cinema and celebrity, and it's just a treat. Even if you never smell a perfume, just to look at their writing is absolutely exhilarating. Another that's at Pratt, And one of the few books about perfume is by Talar J. Mazzeo, The Secret of Chanel No. 5. Of course, the world's most famous perfume. And this is a deep dive into that history, the history of Chanel's vision, of perfumer Ernest Beau's creation of one of the first perfumes with the aldehyde chemical, of the signature bottle, and of the mythology. It's actually Chanel No. 5 turns 100 this year. How can something go so strong for that amount of time? No music that was popular in 1921 are we still listening to. There's no piece of cinema from that year that we're still watching. Great Gatsby is about the only book from the 1920s that has as much staying power ubiquitously in our culture that Chanel No. 5 does. So it's very worth checking out. I will say, side note, that if you want Chanel does not do samples. You got to go to the department store for that. They are very, very, very tightly lidded with their copyright and with their intellectual property. So be careful. I took classes and attended lectures. So I mentioned CK1 and 90s grunge. I put some fun ads in here. So some places that you can learn and go online for lectures to learn more about perfume, and where I learned. There are places of study like the Institute of Art and Olfaction, which is based out of LA. Fantastic. There are independent practitioners like perfume professor, as she calls herself, Jessica Murphy, who's wonderful, who does lectures at various venues. Independent stores were doing master classes, and I'll provide you a list of those at the end. And then independent perfumers, scrappy niche indie people doing their own lines for the love of it, also provide classes, master classes where they'll walk you through their samples. I did everything and anything I could get my hands on. Just so you can see a little bit more of the visual culture involved here, I put two really wonderful 90s ads for some fun, very iconic unisex perfumes. So on the left, we have the very famous Steven Meisel campaign for CK1. You can see how it's young, it's hip, it's grungy, black and white, unisex. And then on the right, Comme des Garçons, the amazing line by designer Ri Kawakubo. Here, it's a similar, little bit of that downtown androgynous sensibility with an asymmetrical bottle. The visual culture has been so fun to dive into as well. And when you start looking at a lot of ads, you start seeing the similarities of the story that's being told in a particular decade. So I love the 90s perfumery is probably my favorite decade. So, and you might find that there are certain periods of time that you really love as you explore fragrances, which is why it's worth going far and wide. Perfume 101. So apologies to those of you who wanted a Perfume 101 program. This is not necessarily that, but I will give you a quick overview. So there are fragrance families. There are general notes that you might find in perfume. There's floral. There's what we now call amber. There's fresher notes, and there's woody notes. And we're going to explore some of those in our fragrance samples later. Most perfumes fit into one of these categories. Some are undefinable, but broadly when we speak, we'll use these categories. Designer versus niche. So I mentioned independent perfumers. One of the great things about the internet is it lets the little guy explore, create, market, and art direct their own line. So I included not quite a proper niche perfume in here for you, but I'd be happy to give you some recommendations of some indie or niche houses, some scrappy upstart designers doing it themselves. But what you're probably more familiar with are designer, either a cosmetics company doing a line, a celebrity doing a line, or a fashion house doing perfume as sort of more attainable luxury. This graphic was too funny not to include. Something to know about perfume is that what you smelled 30 years ago, for example, what your grandmother might have worn, is not going to be the same if you go and buy a bottle of it now. And the reason is reformulation. So IFRA, which is the governing body of fragrance regulation in the EU, has cracked down increasingly over the past decade or so on ingredients that are allowed to be used in perfume. So our skilled and wonderful chemists have made substitutes, but there are ingredients that, for example, like real oak moss, that are no longer legally allowed to be in perfume. But that doesn't mean you can't smell it. You simply have to go on eBay to find vintage perfume. You can trawl antique markets to try and smell something much older. I encourage you to try and smell some pre-Ifra formulations if you can. I didn't include any tonight. That's on you to try them, but it is a deeper and richer and older interpretation of many of the classics. So I thought that the EU foot crushing our wonderful classics there was kind of a funny illustration. And you'll notice on the far left is Aramis. Very bad news today out of the Estee Lauder company. They actually just discontinued. They're planning to phase out and discontinue Aramis. And this happens all the time. And this has happened to me even in the year that I've been learning about perfume. If there's something that you like, buy a bottle of it. If there's something that you want to sniff, get a sample of it, because they will start yanking things off the market. One of my favorite perfumes, Nahema, hasn't been officially discontinued, but the price on used bottles has skyrocketed, and I'm kicking myself for not buying some more backups earlier. So check it out. In my deep dive into my hobby, and this is why I would encourage you to do a deep dive into a hobby that you love. Spend a little money on it, get to know people who are into it. You will find unique experiences and strange coincidences. So some of mine, I'm actually going to go right to left. So I went with a friend to the charming Maryland town of Frederick, and there's a wonderful vintage store there called Venus on the Half Shell. If you ever make it out to Frederick, go there, talk to Jennifer, the owner. She's fantastic. I noticed something called a factice, which is one of those giant fake plastic perfume bottles that you might have used to see in a department store to advertise something. I started chatting with Jennifer about it. She said she had rescued it from a dumpster. I told her I was into fragrance. She actually had a bottle, which is very, very unusual. I purchased it. It was a bottle of Yves Saint Laurent's Paris with the original 80s formulation. It was so delicious and wonderful, by one of my favorite perfumers, Sophia Grossman. What a treat to get to buy that. But Jennifer reached in her cabinet behind the counter and pulled down a bottle, and she said, "I want you to smell this." And I nearly wept. It's a vintage bottle of a very, very old perfume, the oldest that's still continually being made. It's called Chic by the House of Guerlain in Paris. And this bottle is probably from between 1900 and probably about pre-World War II. I couldn't tell you more than that, but you can see it's very old. The perfume had kind of dried down to this resinous amber at the bottom. The glass stopper, I unstoppered it, and it was like a time travel portal to this rich old lavender vanilla fantasy of old Paris. It was magical and so transportative, and I never would have had that sensory experience had I not deep dived into fragrance, but also shared my passion and shared it with others, like I'm sharing with you now. The middle picture is from a wonderful hangout I had with a friend. I started posting about fragrance, meeting other people on Instagram who were into making or designing or writing about it. And I found someone who happened to live in the next neighborhood over from mine, who I never would have met otherwise. You can see her fantastic vintage tackle box that she uses to keep old samples in. And over coffee and pancakes, we smelled and wrote and got to trade some samples. That was so much fun. And again, I encourage you, if you can, to pursue your hobby, because you meet wonderful people that way. And my favorite improbable coincidence of all was about a year into my hobby. I was walking in Fells Point, and you have to understand that it's very, very hard to find used perfume anywhere. I looked down on the sidewalk, and there was a full bottle in a box, untouched, of my late grandmother's signature scent, Fougeres by Rochat, which we're actually going to smell tonight if you have your samples. I actually have my grandmother's bottle. It's much older. There's much less liquid in it. But I thought, okay, this is kind of a spooky coincidence. a meaningful sign, and it felt like an affirmation that pursuing my passion would pay off. So, if you would like to dive into fragrances yourself, there are some places to smell them. I included a picture of the 80s department store counter as kind of an elegy for a model that's being slowly phased out. Many of the classics are going to be nearly impossible to find at a department store, but don't let that discourage you. Ulta and Sephora are great for perfume samples. They're very generous. They will let you spray testers. Sometimes they may have free samples if you're purchasing cosmetics. They can be great if you want that in-person experience. Department stores as well, where you can find it by the counter at Macy's, Nordstrom Rack, etc. Or excuse me, Nordstrom. You'll have fragrance consultants there as well, who are more than happy to make you a little sample. Small boutiques. There are very few of those in the United States. If you're lucky enough to live in New York or LA, there are some more. The closest one to here in Baltimore is called Ariel Shoshana. She's in Northern Virginia, and she's wonderful. Online samples are your friend. You can order them. I've listed some vendors down here. You can take a little screenshot or write these down if you want. Lucky Scent is where I started. The Perfumed Court is great for vintage, Surrender to Chance as well. eBay, if you want to buy either full bottles or manufacturer samples. As I said, Ariel Shoshana is great. Tiger Lily out of San Francisco is great. This is by no means an exhaustive list. Or you could simply ask a friend. You never know who has random old bottles or samples lying around. And I have had so many great experiences that way, even just to uncap their bottle or take a sniff or come over to their house and see what all they have. Of course, it's a pandemic. So, be mindful, be careful. It is a respiratory experience. So be safe. Order samples to your house like I did is a good way to do that. I don't have samples of everything, but this concludes my little lecture about how I got into perfume during the pandemic, and we're going to sniff along. Now, this first one, no one has a sample of this because it's so strong it would have overpowered everything else, but I want to tell you all about it. So if you're going to Ulta or Sephora and you don't know where to start, or if you're going to Macy's or Nordstrom, the first and maybe only perfume I would ever tell you that you have to smell is Angel by Thierry Mugler. It was the first of the gourmands, which is like gourmet, a French word that indicates delicious things, desserts. And it pioneered that genre of wanting to smell like dessert. Before that, there were desserts with notes of chocolate, notes of vanilla, notes of sweet fruit, but something that actually smelled edible was groundbreaking at the time. So many things about Angel are groundbreaking. The fact that it was this bright icy blue, the fact that it's in a bottle that lays flat, shaped like a star, the fact that it smelled like a dumpster full of Neapolitan ice cream that had gone slightly off because it has chocolate, it has vanilla, it has fruit, it has patchouli. You see to the right, there's this very glamorous sort of mermaid Martian campaign with Jerry Hall. Thierry Mugler got his start in the high fashion world, but I think long after his designs, and they're wonderful, are forgotten, I think that Angel as a piece of fashion history is indelible. So go ahead and go check that one out if you ever hit a department store. Another one that I wanted to give you all a sample of, but I did not, but that's okay. You can go to a department store and smell this one, is Jean-Paul Gaultier's La Malle. It's a really great example. So we talked about gourmand of Fougeres. It's another fragrance family. It's from the French word for fern. You'll notice a lot of perfume categories have French names. They're based on, it's a very French-centric medium, but that doesn't mean it's only French or exclusively French. Ferns actually do not have a scent. So as with much of perfume, it's based on a fantasy. but fougere means it's got that kind of aromatic lavender vanilla base. I wanted to show off Le Male as also a really good example of bottle design. You have this very Warhol-esque can that the bottle comes in, and then the bottle itself is this sort of beefcake, disembodied torso. And then the scent within is just this room clearing, funny, masculine cologne that I find personally quite vile, but important to smell as an example of, as I said, I love the 90s, of just the exciting things being done with 90s perfume. So I mentioned the 50s, 70s, and 90s as great decades for perfume. So if you have your samples, and if you don't, that's okay. You can follow along or you can log off, no hard feelings. We are going to sniff and talk. So get those typing fingers ready. I would love to see your comments in real time on Facebook about your impressions. So the first perfume that we're going to be smelling is Femme by Rocha. And the name of the perfumer who made this is Edmund Rudnitska. This was made in 1944. So as World War II was winding down, women still wanted glamour and excitement, and even the war effort didn't fully shut down all the great couture houses of Paris. So you can, if you have a sample bottle, I would recommend kind of rocking the cap side to side so that you don't accidentally end up yanking out the atomizer from the liquid, from the juice. So go ahead and give a good spray on one of your samples. Take a second, you can wave it back and forth, and give a good sniff. And if you have any impressions, initial impressions, what you think it smells like, if you like it, don't like it, there's no wrong impression, right? If you say this is disgusting, I hate it, it smells like a flaming dumpster fire, I won't be offended. And go ahead and share any impressions of Femme. So while you're doing that, I just want to talk a little bit about the mythology behind Femme. So you'll notice the word is French for woman. It has a very curvaceous bottle that was reportedly inspired by Mae West's physique. It's very floral and a little bit matronly. It's a style called chypre. Again, like I said, the French words, that's the French word for cypress, as in the country. As chypre is characterized by an accord, much like a musical chord. You have 3 notes, they make something new. We have that here, but with scent. So we have citrus top notes, that's what you smell right away. A middle on cistus labdanum, which is a kind of resin. And then you have the mossy animalic bottom, which is real strong here, from oak moss. That moss I said that is not any longer available as a perfume ingredient. Don't worry, this is made with artificial oak moss. This is a fruity chypre. It's a little bit floral. And this is what people smelled like in the 1940s, if you can believe it. I see someone commented, I don't immediately like the powderiness, but it's evolving in an interesting way. That's a really good comment. Perfumes do tend to evolve. They're not one note, they have a progression. They have, like I said, the top, middle, base, something called the dry down, which is what it might smell like an hour in. There's a linear story here that's being told. You know, I'll be honest, I don't love this one either, but I think it's important to understand from a historical standpoint. And yes, it does evolve. Any last comments about Femme? And then we're going to move on to a different chypre. So 2 perfumes in the same family can smell wildly different. I mentioned Aromatics Elixir a couple times. This one is really special. It's one of my personal favorites. I have a stash of it. So you can go ahead and grab that sample if you have it. I bought like 3 bottles in case they ever stop making it. It's really silly. And then Clinique sells just massive amounts of this at Christmas. So this is also a chypre here. I have the oak moss and the cistus labdanum. That's what they get the resin from. Here's the iconic bottle. So go ahead and you can uncork your little bottle, do a little spray. Fair warning, this one is really, really strong. So it's not for the faint of heart. You may want to wash your hands after. Notice the title, Aromatics Elixir. I see that I have a comment about fruit. It's unidentifiable as to what fruit it is. I think that's about femme. So Aromatics Elixir is also a chypre, but you have that strong dose of patchouli. This is a perfume from 1971, when the hippie era was functionally over for the bohemians of Haight-Ashbury or the West Village. But in the Clinique counters of suburban America, where women were buying perfume, the sort of back to the earth aesthetics were starting to explode. So Aromatics Elixir has that. It's got that patchouli. It's got that oak moss. It has almost a medicinal aromatic quality. And it's amazing that something that smells like this is still being manufactured, because it's kind of a throwback, not just to the hippie era, but to old-fashioned French great perfume houses. This is directly inspired from perfumes like Femme. It's love it or hate it, but it's an important piece of olfactory art. So if you have any comments about Aromatics Elixir, please drop them in the chat. One of the famous taglines of Aromatics Elixir that I really love is that it's a perfume that acts like a medicine and behaves like a drug. It's very polarizing. It's hippie-ish. It's almost like a folk remedy, an unidentified vial of something that you might buy at a head shop. I see a comment that says it brings to mind gold jewelry. I don't know how to explain that. That's not wrong. That's not a wrong association at all. There's no right or wrong association to have. There's the gold cap. It would certainly smell good on someone wearing a lot of gold. So we went to the 40s/50s. We're in the 70s. The pendulum swung to very bombastic, dramatic, overbearing florals in the 80s. I didn't give you any 80s florals today, but that's okay. We're just going to skip directly over them, and we're going to time travel to the 90s with our next vial. So after the big blousy 80s, we have the 90s minimal watery new age. And something that made that possible is a molecule called calone, which was synthesized. Calone is the basis of any kind of cucumber melon scent that you would have had back then, anything kind of watery or functional. So in 1992, Lo Dise by the Japanese house of fashion, Issey Miyake, was tasked with making a perfume that smelled like water. Of course, we don't really think of water as having a scent. It doesn't. Neither does it have a color, right? Water's clear, and yet we always think of it as blue. I included that picture of Pure Moods because it really captures the aesthetic sensibility of the time. But in a completely different direction from the dramatic chypres that we just smelled, we're going to smell Lo Dise. Try not to explode your little tester everywhere like I just did. I always describe Lo Dise as the 90s in the bottle. If you're old enough to remember the 90s, maybe even had a bottle of this. Take a second and sniff it. So Lo Dise is from the early 90s, and that calone molecule that I mentioned is, the basis. This fragrance was the basis of every knockoff Bath and Body Works cucumber melon, some other things that you might have smelled, like sunflowers, like Elizabeth Arden has a lot of this. I see a comment. I think calone is my scent nemesis. Yes, it's very much love it or hate it. It's easy to burn out on, and it's extraordinarily unfashionable now. But it is functionally the 90s in a bottle. I included a picture of the molecule there. And you'll notice also the bottle design is much more minimal, much more watery. You've got the frosted glass, you've got the silver, which are kind of echoed in interior decoration of the time. I always think of this, if Pure Moods, those mood music albums from the 90s were a scent, this would be it. Major time travel. I love this one. I see people commenting. That's so much fun. Yeah, it's wildly different from the others, but I love it because it is so different and it is so minimal. But with only that cucumber melon oceanic cologne note, you can do so much. And somehow it is the smell of water. I don't know how, but it is. So I love the 90s. We're going to stay in the 90s. This time traveling to 1995. It wouldn't be a talk on perfume without a classic floral. So this is Estee Lauder's Pleasures. So point of fact, Estee Lauder owns a lot of different imprints. So Estee Lauder and her autobiography, side note, really fun. You can get that at the Pratt Library. Clinique is a subset of that company. So Aromatics Elixir, which we smelled, is from the Estee Lauder company. So is Pleasures, but it's just under their Estee Lauder label. So this is from 1995. This is a pretty classic floral. Take a second and sniff it. Just floral, nothing else, not really any woods, not so much musk. Just floral, not animalic. I included the ad here because the sort of inoffensive Liz Hurley in a pink sweater in a field of flowers kind of nails the vibe that I think the perfumer was going for. Any comments? Feel free to share in the chat if this brings up any memories for you. I titled this slide 90s Soft Soap Functional Mainstream because to me, it smells like something that would have been a scent for a bottle of liquid soap. I see one of my commenters said, yeah, the smell of every magazine in my childhood. Yes, this is exactly what all scratch and sniff perfume ads smelled like 25 years ago. It's inoffensive, it's sweet. I wouldn't choose to wear it necessarily, but I think it's important for you all to smell, just to have an example of kind of the pure floral notes that dominated perfume for much of its existence as an art form. The flowers in this seem prickly or spiky in my nose. Yes, it definitely wakes you up. It's not a warm, cuddly, fuzzy flower. It's it's kind of a fresh cut grass experience. And despite the very sensual name, it's a very inoffensive, family-friendly office scent. You could call this an office scent because it would be okay to wear to the office in a way that Fum or Aromatics Elixir would just be utterly inappropriate. It's also a really good example, I may have said this, of a functional fragrance. So this is the kind of bouquet that you would expect, not just in a perfume, but in scented products like soap or detergent or any kind of household good. It would be appropriate for that. Just completely different. And I would be remiss if we didn't talk about contemporary trends in scent. So your final sample is going to be called Greylock. It's by a perfume startup out of Austin called Fleur. It's not quite niche. It markets itself as niche, but neither is it one scrappy guy in his garage working on a passion project. So the 2010s were dominated by a kind of minimalist, sandalwood, very woody decade, unisex. Design was very important. As I said earlier, kind of black, thin sans serif lettering on a white background is very definitive in this decade. This perfume, if you want to go ahead and spray it, is also very different from the others. Greylock by Fleur. See if you can identify the note in that. If there are any guesses, go ahead and pop them in the chat. Or excuse me, in the comments. Vetiver is a big note. I've got a picture of the vetiver in the middle. And then there's a kind of wood in it, if you can guess. Vegetable, good guess. It's Georgia pine. This is made with real recycled Georgia pine. And I will admit, I fell for the marketing tactic here. I bought a bottle of this because I liked the idea of reclaimed wood being used in perfume. But this is just a very piney scent. If you have any comments or observations about it, please do add the comments. It's very unisex. Of course, perfume is for everyone. It's not gendered. It's for everybody. But this is definitely marketed to anyone, whereas many of the scents we smelled tonight were very feminine. It's almost minty. Yeah, I agree. It's got that sort of toothpaste functional freshness. You can imagine this being a body wash scent as much as you can anything else. So, and it's very of the 2010s. Instead of being wildly dramatic, wildly hippie-ish, wildly minimal, it's sort of a back to nature minimalist interpretation. And it's got that opaque bottle as well, which is a sort of newer design affectation instead of being clear. So this concludes our sniff along portion. It's pretty much barely scratching the surface of all the different kinds of perfume you can smell, but I hope in these 5 samples you get a good sense of all the different ways that the art form can present. I mean, it's infinite beyond that, but these are just a few ones. So that's almost my time. I'd love to know your signature scent. So if you'd like to drop a comment on Facebook, my Instagram, as I mentioned, is posted up there, or you can send me an email at cbeckett@prattlibrary.org. I'm going to jump back on the stream with Mel. It was so good sniffing with you all tonight. I hope we can do this again. And please tune in for more programs at Pratt Library. Melanie, over to you.
Well, that was phenomenal. I think I was an over-enthusiastic spritzer. I had a combination of everything after the first one, so it was hard to focus on one. Is there a certain way that you perform the sniff test? Do you turn off the lights? How do you focus when you do your scent smells and write about them?
Sure. Well, I ought to have demoed this for you all, but I'll wiggle the cap off so that I don't spray it in my eye. Make sure that you watch where you're putting the eye of the spritzer. I know I've gotten myself in the face. You can make your own little sampler like I did. You don't need to buy them or get them from a department store. I'm going to go ahead and push down strongly, spray it on my paper, wave it a little bit underneath, and give it a second because it changes, as you all know. And then I might write things down. I'm a big fan of writing by longhand so that I'm not too distracted by the screen. I like to have a clear and clean environment, not too much music playing or no music at all, have the TV off, and just focus. It's almost meditative.
Lovely. Does anyone else watching have any questions? Please feel free to share with us.
Or if you have a signature perfume, please post the comment. I'm always delighted to know what people are wearing or like to wear.
I know my grandmother always wore white shoulders.
Oh, classic.
Classic. And if I ever smell it, I think of her. So yes, you're right. It evokes memories. Well, if we are running out of time, so thank you so much, Cornelia, for the informative and fascinating program. It was sensational. I couldn't resist. And thank you, audience, for joining us. We so appreciate you. And what did you do during the pandemic? We'll return on Thursday, November 4th at 6:45 p.m. Phil Jacoby will share his pandemic kayak adventures as a volunteer with Team River Runners, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to provide all veterans and their families an opportunity to find health, healing, and community purpose through paddle sports. So we hope you will join us again then. Go to Pratt Library for additional details. There's so many wonderful programs coming up in October. In fact, next week, if you're looking for another virtual program, Haunted Maryland, it's Supernatural Hun. This is a part one of the Dark Side of Maryland series of spooky programs being presented by Pratt's Maryland department during the month of October. And another October highlight is Henry Winkler will be in conversation about his life and work during an in-person Writers Live event on the 12th in Central Hall. So thank you again, Cornelia. Thank you, audience. Everyone stay safe, stay well, and enjoy the rest of your evening.